Hey, it's Bilal, and this is Deep Sea, the podcast about seeing the world more deeply. My last podcast was a lot more freeform and unedited, and I thought I'd continue in that vein for today's podcast and perhaps for further ones as well. I've been thinking a lot about maturity, growing up and responsibility, and this has certainly been a year where I've had to think a lot more about this. Obviously, many of you who listen to my podcasts or read my blogs know that my mother passed away recently. And this has really forced me to think about what it means to grow up, maturity. Also, over the past week, I've had more time to reflect on my year so far. So not only did my mother pass away, but also I decided to leave banking and set up my own business. And I think these two facts oddly are connected. On the one hand, my mother passed away, my parent, and then also I left my corporate parent. So ever since I left university, I've always been working for a corporate. And in some ways, in the work life at least, a corporate is like a parent. You know, the corporate provides support, care. There's always somebody above you to tell you what to do or not to do. And there's a certain level of comfort and security in working for a company. But for whatever reason, this year, I decided back in April to leave my bank and set up my own business. So there was something about this year, or at least about my age, where I felt confident or comfortable enough to strike out on my own. And now that my mother's passed away as well, I've also lost that biological or psychological support that I always had with my mother and also my dad as well to some extent. Although I've been finding that there's something really quite primordial and deep connection with the mother. And I've been thinking, is there something about the 40s in particular that leads one to have this maturing or growing up? And if you look back in many traditions, there does seem to be something about the age of 40. In the Jewish tradition, in Kabbalah, the age of 40 is viewed as the age where you start to attain deeper knowledge or deeper wisdom. In Hebrew, they call it binah. In the Islamic tradition, the Prophet Muhammad received his first revelation from God at the age of 42. And outside of religion, if we look at some of the literary giants like Shakespeare, they allude to the age of 40. There's a sonnet Shakespeare has which goes something like this. When 40 winters shall beseech thy brow, and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field, thy youth's proud livery so gazed on now will be a tattered weed of small worth held. So there he's alluding to having lived through 40 winters, something about your youth is now gone and you shed that away. And there's a certain maturity that happens at the age of 40. So in my case, I'm in my 40s, I've lost a parent, I've left my corporate parent, and I'm striking out on my own. That would seem like a very lonely affair, but what I have found in recent weeks when my mother's passing, that so many people have reached out and provided support. And equally on my business side, my business Macrohive, I found that so many people have come out and reached out to provide support for me as I'm building out this business. I don't feel like I no longer have any support from an elder, so to speak. Instead, what I'm finding is that through these experiences, it's forcing me to reach out or accept help from everyone else. And it's making me appreciate that rather than being dependent on someone above me, whether it's a parent or company, now I'm more interdependent. So I'm not necessarily dependent on anyone, nor am I independent of anyone. Rather, I am interdependent on others. So I rely on others, others rely on me. It feels kind of natural and organic in many, many ways. And it feels very natural. In my work's journey, I'm finding that it is possible to create a work environment which is more human-centered rather than work-centered. What I mean by that is that rather than everyone having to conform to work, such as working 9 to 5 and having to prioritize work over personal relationships, one can instead shift work to conform to humans and humanity. So if one does have some personal things to deal with, one can change one's work dynamics. One doesn't have to work 9 to 5. And I'm finding that with a business of my own, I'm able to introduce that ethos. Hopefully it can last. Hopefully this is something that's real. And hopefully the fact that my mother has passed and I've left the corporate world at the same time is an important transition and maturing point for me. And it's a time for me to have a growth as I become a more mature adult. Well, that's my hope, at least. Anyway, thanks for listening. Get in touch with me if you have any thoughts on what I've talked about today. You can follow me on social media as well and interact with me on social media. My Twitter handle is @BilalForties123. I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn. You can see my work at macrohive.com. I'll be back soon, so tune in then.